The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. in a studio apartment in Queens where the radiator never worked, and the neighbors fought through walls thin as paper. Grace Mitchell didn't recognize the number glowing on her cracked screen, but desperation has a way of making people answer calls they shouldn't. She'd been awake anyway. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the collection agencies calling during business hours and the hospital sending letters marked final notice in red ink that seemed to bleed accusation across her kitchen table. Her daughter's medical bills had climbed past $60,000, a mountain of debt that grew taller every time Lily's breathing treatments failed and they had to rush back to the ER. Grace worked 2 jobs. Mornings at a laundromat in Astoria where the heat made her dizzy and the quarters never added up right. Nights waitressing at a diner off the Grand Central Parkway where truckers left dollar tips and told her to smile more. She was 28 years old and felt 50, carrying exhaustion in her bones the way some women carry perfume. The phone kept ringing. Her hand reached for it before her mind could stop her. She meant to call her sister in Milwaukee. Meant to ask for money she knew Jenny didn't have. To beg for help she'd begged for too many times already. But her fingers were shaking and the numbers blurred, and somewhere between intention and action, she dialed wrong. 1 digit off. That's all it takes to change a life. The voice that answered didn't ask who she was. Didn't question why someone was calling at this hour. It simply spoke, low and certain, with an authority that made the air in her apartment feel different. Step outside now. 2 men appeared at her building's entrance before she'd even processed the command. They didn't knock. They didn't need to. One stood by a black SUV with tinted windows that reflected the sodium streetlights of her neighborhood like dark water. The other waited by her door, patient as death. Grace should have been terrified. Should have called 911. Should have screamed. Should have done any of the things a woman alone in New York at 3 a.m. is supposed to do when strange men appear outside her home. But there was something in that voice on the phone. Something that suggested these men weren't here to hurt her. Not yet, anyway. She stepped outside into the November cold wearing yesterday's jeans and a sweatshirt with coffee stains she'd stopped noticing. The street was empty the way Queens gets empty in the dead hours, when even the city that never sleeps takes a breath. The man by the door didn't speak. He simply opened the sub's rear door and stepped back, a gesture that was somehow both invitation and command. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Grace climbed inside because she didn't know what else to do. Because her life had become a series of impossible choices and this was just another one. Because part of her, the part that was so tired of fighting, so tired of losing, wondered if whatever came next could possibly be worse than what she was already living through. The interior smelled like leather and something expensive she couldn't name. The man who slid into the driver's seat didn't look at her. The engine started with a purr that was nothing like her own car, the 2003 Honda that had died 6 months ago and still sat in her building's lot accumulating parking tickets she couldn't pay. They drove through Queens in silence, past the bodegas with metal gates pulled down, past the 24-hour laundromats where people who worked night shifts washed their uniforms, past the bus stops where early morning workers would soon gather in the pre-dawn dark. The city rolled by her window like a film she'd seen too many times, familiar and strange all at once. Somewhere around Flushing, Grace found her voice. Where are we going? The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. He didn't answer. They crossed into Manhattan as the skyline began to glow with the first hint of morning. The buildings here weren't like the ones in her neighborhood. These were towers of glass and steel that caught the light and held it, monuments to money and power that felt as far from her life as the moon. The SUV pulled up to a building on the Upper East Side where a doorman stood despite the hour, where the lobby beyond the glass doors looked like something from a magazine Grace would never buy. The driver got out, opened her door, and waited. She followed because she'd come this far. Because turning back now seemed more frightening than moving forward. Because that voice on the phone had spoken to something in her that was tired of running. The elevator rose in silence. 30 floors. 40. 50. Her ears popped. Her heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment that overlooked Central Park. Dawn was breaking over the reservoir, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that would have been beautiful if Grace could have focused on anything except the man standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He turned when she entered, and Grace understood immediately that she'd called someone dangerous, someone powerful, someone who didn't exist in the same world she did. His name was Caleb Stone, though she wouldn't learn that until later. What she learned first was the way he looked at her, not like she was an inconvenience or a mistake, but like she was exactly who he'd been expecting. Like he'd been waiting for her call. "You're drowning," he said, and it wasn't a question. Grace wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was fine, that she could handle her own life. But the words died in her throat because they both knew they'd be lies. He moved toward her with the kind of confidence that comes from owning rooms, owning buildings, owning pieces of the city that people like Grace only move through like ghosts. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same certainty it had on the phone. "I can make it stop. All of it. The debt. The calls. The fear. I can make it disappear like it never existed." Grace had learned not to believe in fairy tales, had learned that offers that sound too good to be true usually are. But standing in that penthouse as the sun rose over Manhattan, looking at a man who spoke about erasing $60,000 in medical debt like it was nothing more than a rounding error, she felt something shift inside her chest. "What do you want?" she asked, and her voice was steadier than she felt. Caleb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your trust." That's when Grace knew she should run. Should thank him for his time and take the elevator back down to street level and return to her broken radiator and her collection notices and her 2 jobs that would never be enough. Should choose the devil she knew over the one standing before her in a penthouse that cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. But she didn't run. She stood there as the city woke up below them, as the first commuters began their journeys into Manhattan, as her old life waited for her across the East River in an apartment she could barely afford. She stood there and felt herself begin to fall. The thing about drowning is that you don't realize how deep you've gone until someone throws you a rope. Grace had been sinking for so long that she'd forgotten what the surface looked like, forgotten what it felt like to breathe without the weight of panic pressing down on her chest. Caleb Stone was offering her air. The question was what it would cost her lungs. He didn't pressure her for an answer, didn't crowd her space or make threats wrapped in velvet promises. Instead, he moved to the kitchen, a stretch of marble and steel that looked like it belonged in a restaurant, not a home, and started making coffee. The mundane domesticity of it jarred against everything else about the moment. "Lily," he said, and Grace's blood went cold. 7 years old. "Asthma, that's gotten worse this year. You've been to Elmhurst Hospital 6 times in the last 4 months." He knew her daughter's name, knew her medical history. The coffee machine hissed and gurgled, filling the silence with sound that did nothing to calm the hammering of Grace's heart. "How do you?" "I know things," Caleb said simply, pouring coffee into 2 mugs that probably cost more than her weekly groceries. "It's what keeps me alive in this city. Information. Knowing which threads to pull and which to leave alone." He handed her a mug. The coffee was perfect, not the burnt diner sludge she drank from a pot that had been sitting for hours, not the instant powder she made at home when she could afford it. This tasted the way coffee was supposed to taste, rich and smooth and warm. Grace held the mug because her hands needed something to do. "You still haven't told me what you want." "I want you safe," Caleb said, and the simplicity of it was more terrifying than any threat could have been. "Your building isn't secure. Your neighborhood has seen 3 armed robberies this month. Your landlord doesn't fix the locks and doesn't care that the fire escape is rusted through." Every word was true. Grace had been afraid to walk home after her night shifts, had started carrying pepper spray that expired 2 years ago, had taught Lily to hide in the bathroom if she ever heard breaking glass. "I can move you," Caleb continued, leaning against the counter with a casualness that belied the weight of what he was offering. "You and your daughter. Somewhere safe. Somewhere the debt collectors can't find you, where Lily can see doctors who actually give a damn, where you don't have to work yourself to death just to stay 1 step ahead of eviction." It sounded like paradise. It sounded like a trap. And in exchange, Grace asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Caleb's expression didn't change. You stay put. You don't run. You let me keep you safe. The words were simple, but the implication was clear. She'd be trading one kind of cage for another, swapping her cramped studio and mounting bills for a gilded prison where every comfort came with invisible bars. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not, he said, reading the fear in her eyes. I'm not asking for your body or your soul. I'm asking for your presence, for your trust, for you to let me be what you need right now. Grace wanted to ask why. Why her? Why now? What did a man like him, with his penthouse views and his drivers and his dangerous knowledge, want with a waitress from Queens who couldn't even dial a phone number correctly? But she was afraid of the answer. Afraid it would make too much sense. Afraid it would make leaving impossible. The sun was fully up now, streaming through those massive windows and turning Manhattan into something that looked almost hopeful. Grace thought about going back to her apartment, to the stacks of bills and the broken heating and the way Lily's breathing sounded at night when the cold made her asthma worse. She thought about the next 6 months, the next year, the endless parade of impossible choices that stretched out before her like a highway with no exits. She thought about the tiredness that had settled into her bones, the way she'd started to flinch when her phone rang, the panic attacks in the laundromat bathroom when no one could see her fall apart. How long? She asked. As long as it takes. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Grace set down her coffee mug on the marble counter and felt her life pivot on this moment. She could walk out, take the elevator down, find her way back to Queens on the subway, return to her reality, keep drowning at her own pace. Or she could stay, could let this stranger with his impossible offer pull her from the water, could trade her freedom for her daughter's health, her independence for a chance to breathe. It wasn't really a choice. Not when Lily's breathing treatments cost more than Grace made in a month. Not when the hospital had started talking about payment plans that would take 30 years to clear. Not when every door she knocked on had closed in her face. Okay, Grace said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff. Okay. Caleb nodded as if he'd known she'd say yes. As if this had all been decided long before she'd dialed the wrong number in the dead of night. I'll have my people pack up your apartment. You and Lily will be moved by tonight. I need to be there, Grace said quickly. I need to explain to her. You will be, but not alone. Not anymore. The finality in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like relief. Someone else making decisions. Someone else carrying the weight. For the first time in years, Grace felt her shoulders drop from where they'd been hunched up by her ears. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. By noon, Grace was back in Queens with 2 of Caleb's people, a woman named Harper who smiled like she knew all your secrets, and a man who didn't give his name but moved through the apartment with military efficiency. They packed up her life in boxes while Grace held Lily and tried to explain that they were moving somewhere better. Is it far? Lily asked, her small hand gripping Grace's shirt. Not too far, Grace lied, but you'll have your own room. And better doctors. Lily's eyes widened. She'd never had her own room. They'd shared that studio since she was born, Grace sleeping on the couch while Lily took the only bed. The idea of space, of privacy, was foreign and wonderful. By evening, they were gone from Queens. The superintendent didn't question the movers, didn't ask where Grace was going. He just took the keys and the check that Harper handed him, covering the last 2 months of rent Grace had been dodging, and that was that. The new place wasn't another apartment. It was a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, the kind of neighborhood where Grace had once taken Lily to walk along the promenade and pretend they belonged. 3 floors, a backyard, windows that actually closed properly and let in light without also letting in the cold. But the front door had a security system that required codes. The windows had sensors. And when Grace tried to go for a walk that first night after Lily fell asleep in her new room, Harper was there, gentle but firm. Best to stay inside tonight. Let things settle. It was the first time Grace felt the bars close. Not locks on the door, but the understanding that leaving wasn't going to be as simple as walking out. That safety and captivity could wear the same face. She stood at the window of her new brownstone, looking out at Brooklyn Heights and the Manhattan skyline beyond it, and wondered what she'd actually agreed to. Wondered if drowning might have been easier than being saved. But then she heard Lily cough, just once, soft and small, and remembered why she'd said yes. Remembered that love makes people do impossible things, dangerous things, things they can never take back. Days in Brooklyn Heights moved differently than they had in Queens. Slower, quieter, like time itself had softened around the edges, padded by money and insulated from the harsh realities Grace had spent years navigating. Lily thrived. That was the first thing Grace noticed, the thing that made everything else bearable. Her daughter saw a pediatric pulmonologist in Manhattan, not the overworked ER doctors who'd treated her asthma like an inconvenience, but a specialist who actually listened, who adjusted her medications, who prescribed a nebulizer that didn't sound like it was dying, who talked about management instead of just crisis intervention. Within 2 weeks, Lily was sleeping through the night, playing without having to stop and catch her breath every few minutes, laughing in a way Grace had almost forgotten she could. And Grace was learning what it meant to live in a cage made of comfort. She didn't go back to the laundromat, didn't return to the diner where the owner had probably filled her shifts without a second thought. Her phone, a new one, provided by Caleb with a number nobody from her old life had, stayed silent in ways that were both relief and isolation. The bills disappeared. All of them. Elmhurst Hospital stopped calling. The collection agencies vanished like they'd never existed. Grace checked her credit report one afternoon while Lily was at school, a private school in the neighborhood now, with small classes and teachers who knew her name, and saw her debt wiped clean. $60,000 gone like breath on glass. She should have felt free. Instead, she felt owned. Caleb visited 3 times in the first month. Never announced, never predictable. He'd appear in the evening after Lily was asleep, let himself in with keys Grace didn't know he had, and sit in her living room like he belonged there. Which, she supposed, he did. This was his house, his furniture, his carefully constructed cage. They didn't talk about much. He'd ask how Lily was doing, if Grace needed anything, if she was settling in. She'd answer honestly because lying to him felt impossible. Those eyes, gray like storm clouds over the Atlantic, seemed to see through whatever careful wall she tried to build. "You're angry," he said one night in February when snow was falling soft and silent over Brooklyn. Grace was folding laundry at the kitchen table. Lily's new clothes, bought by Harper during a shopping trip Grace hadn't been invited on. She didn't look up. "I'm fine." "You're furious. You hate that you can't leave. Hate that you needed my help. Hate that it's working." She stopped folding. "You don't know what I feel. I know you wake up at 3 a.m. and stand by the window. I know you tried the front door last week just to see if it would open without the alarm going off. I know you're looking for the edges of your cage." Grace's hands trembled. "Are you watching me?" "I'm keeping you safe." "That's not an answer." Caleb stood, moved closer. Not threatening, but his presence filled the kitchen anyway. "The difference is everything. You think this is about control. It's about survival. Mine and yours. I don't understand." "You don't need to. Not yet." He left before she could push further, disappearing into the February night like smoke. Grace stood in her beautiful kitchen with its marble counters and stainless steel appliances and felt more alone than she had in her studio apartment where the neighbors' fights came through the walls. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. March brought the first real test of her captivity. Lily's school was having a parent-teacher conference in the middle of the day. Grace wanted to go alone, to feel like a normal mother doing normal things. But Harper was there, pleasant and immovable as always. "I'll drive you," Harper said. "I can take the subway." Not a good idea. Why not? Harper's smile didn't waver. Because Caleb said so. And there it was. The real bars of her cage. Not locks or alarms or security cameras, but a single man's word that everyone around her obeyed without question. Grace went to the conference with Harper driving, sat through the teacher's glowing reports about Lily's progress, and felt like a fraud. Yes, her daughter was thriving. Yes, she was healthy and happy and safe. But at what cost? What was Grace teaching her about autonomy, about standing on your own, about not letting anyone, no matter how powerful, dictate your life? That night, after Lily was asleep, Grace did something reckless. She walked out the front door. Didn't disable the alarm, didn't tell Harper, just walked out into the Brooklyn night and started walking. She made it 3 blocks before the black SUV pulled up beside her. The same one from that first night. The driver didn't speak, just drove slowly alongside her as she walked, patient as a shadow. Grace kept walking. Past brownstones with their glowing windows, past the promenade with its view of Manhattan's lights reflected in the East River, past the late-night bodega where an old man was closing up shop. The SUV followed. Finally, she stopped, turned to face it. The driver got out, opened the rear door. "Get in, Ms. Mitchell." "No." "Then I'll follow you all night. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. Grace climbed into the SUV and let herself be driven back to the brownstone where Harper was waiting on the front steps, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" Harper asked. Grace pushed past her into the house. "I just wanted to walk." "You can walk. Just tell us first. So you can follow me. So we can keep you safe." Grace laughed, bitter and sharp. "Safe from what? What am I so important that I need armed drivers and security systems and people watching my every move?" Harper's expression shifted, something sad flickering behind her professional demeanor. "You really don't know, do you?" "Know what?" But Harper just shook her head. "That's his story to tell, not mine." Grace lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her beautiful bedroom in her beautiful prison, and tried to understand what her life had become. She'd traded chains made of debt for chains made of protection. Was one really better than the other? Or had she just traded one kind of drowning for another? The phone rang at 2 a.m. Her new phone. The one only Caleb and Harper and Lily's school had the number 4. She answered because she was awake anyway. "You walked out tonight." Caleb's voice, low and tight with something that might have been anger or fear. Grace couldn't tell which. "I wanted a. You wanted to test me, to see how far you could go. Can you blame me?" Silence on the line. Then, "No. But it was stupid. Dangerous. There are people in this city who would use you to get to me." "I don't even know who you are," Grace said, and realized it was true. She'd been living in his house, under his protection, for 2 months. But she knew almost nothing about the man who'd pulled her from the water. "I'm someone who makes enemies," Caleb said. "Someone who plays games with stakes you can't imagine. And now, because of a wrong number and my own weakness, you're a piece on that board." "Your weakness?" Another pause. "I should have let you go that first night. Should have paid your debts anonymously and disappeared. But I didn't. And now we're both trapped." The line went dead. Grace lay in the dark, holding a phone that still felt foreign in her hand, and understood for the first time that maybe she wasn't the only prisoner in this arrangement. Maybe Caleb Stone had his own cage. Maybe his was just bigger and harder to see. Spring came to Brooklyn with cherry blossoms along the promenade and longer days that made the brownstone feel less like a cell and more like a home Grace still didn't quite believe belonged to her. Lily had friends now. Real friends who came over for playdates that Harper supervised with the attention of a Secret Service agent protecting the president's daughter. Grace had started to learn the rules of her new existence. Don't go out after dark without telling Harper. Don't take calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Don't ask too many questions about where Caleb went or what he did or why sometimes he'd show up at the brownstone with blood on his knuckles that he'd wash off in her kitchen sink without explanation. She'd learned that he owned restaurants across the city, legitimate businesses with Michelin stars and reservation lists months long. But she'd also learned, through careful observation and things Harper let slip, that those restaurants were fronts. That Caleb's real business was the kind conducted in backrooms and sealed with handshakes that might as well be signed in blood. He wasn't mob in the traditional sense, wasn't Italian or Russian or part of any organized family. He was something newer, more fluid, a power broker in a city that ran on power. Someone who knew things, who controlled things, who made problems disappear for the right price. And somehow, Grace had become one of those problems. April brought the first crack in Caleb's carefully maintained armor. He showed up at the brownstone on a Thursday evening, earlier than usual. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a tension in his shoulders that Grace had learned to recognize as danger. "Is Lily asleep?" he asked. Grace nodded. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." He moved to the window, looking out at the street like he expected to see threats in the shadows. "Do you know what it's like to be afraid of your own heart?" The question caught Grace off guard. In 2 months, Caleb had been controlled, careful, never letting her see beneath the surface. This felt different, vulnerable. "Tell me," she said softly. He turned to face her. "I have enemies, Grace. Real ones. People who would hurt anyone connected to me just to watch me bleed. I've spent years making sure I had nothing they could use against me. No family. No relationships. Nothing that could be leverage. And then I called the wrong number. And then you called my private line. The one only 5 people in this city have. The one I answer because any call to it means emergency or opportunity." He laughed, bitter. "You were neither. You were just a woman trying to ask her sister for help. And I should have hung up, should have blocked the number and forgotten about it. Why didn't you?" Caleb crossed the room until he was close enough that Grace could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Because you sounded the way I felt. Drowning. Desperate. Out of options. And for one stupid moment, I thought I could save someone. You did save me. I put a target on your back. On Lily's back. Every day you're connected to me is another day someone could decide you're worth taking." Grace felt her pulse quicken. "Then let us go." "I can't." The words came out strangled. "Don't you understand? It's too late. You're in their sights now. The only thing keeping you safe is that they think you matter to me. If I cut you loose, you become just another loose end, another witness to eliminate. If your heart's racing too, take a breath. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories." The truth of it settled over Grace like ash. She wasn't just trapped in this brownstone, in this life. She was trapped in Caleb's world because leaving would be more dangerous than staying. "How did this happen?" she whispered. "I got careless. I let myself care." He reached out, fingers barely brushing her cheek. "I started checking on you, making sure the hospital was treating Lily right, paying attention to things I should have ignored. And people notice when I pay attention. They start asking questions, start looking at what I'm looking at. So this is all my fault." "Yes." He dropped his hand. "But knowing that doesn't change anything. We're stuck, Grace. You and me and Lily. At least until I can figure out how to make you uninteresting again." Grace wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at him for dragging her into his world of violence and secrets. But looking at him now, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried in his shoulders, she saw something she recognized. He was as trapped as she was, just in a different way. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't." "Why not?" "Because there's a man in Philadelphia who wants me dead, and he just found out about you." The word should have terrified her. Instead, Grace felt something shift in her chest. A strange, reckless defiance. She'd spent so long being afraid. Of debt, of eviction, of her daughter not being able to breathe, that this new fear felt almost familiar. Then I guess we better make sure he doesn't succeed, she said. Caleb stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. You should be running. Where? You just said leaving would make it worse. You should be blaming me. Maybe I do. Maybe I'm furious with you for pulling me into this. Grace moved closer to him, surprised by her own boldness. But I'm also not dead. Lily's not struggling to breathe. We're safe and warm and fed, and those things matter. So if fury is the price of my daughter sleeping through the night, then fine. I'll pay it. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He reached out again, this time letting his hand settle against her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that contradicted everything she knew about him. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. What did you expect? Fear, resentment, maybe gratitude. But this? He shook his head. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. Grace leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. I'm terrified. Every day. But I've been terrified before. This is just a different kind of afraid. They stood like that, close enough to share breath, while the spring evening darkened outside the windows. Grace could feel the moments stretching thin, could sense they were approaching a line neither of them should cross. Caleb must have felt it too because he stepped back, letting his hand fall away. I should go. You could stay. The words left her mouth before she'd decided to say them. Not. I just mean you look exhausted. There's a guest room. You could sleep. I don't sleep well around people. Neither do I. But maybe we could both try. It was a mistake. Grace knew it was a mistake even as she said it. Letting him stay, letting him deeper into this life they were building in the space between captivity and care, it would only make things more complicated. But complicated was better than whatever alternative waited outside these walls. Caleb studied her face like he was trying to read something written there. Finally, he nodded. Just a few hours. He fell asleep on her couch with his shirt still on, his phone on the coffee table within arm's reach. Grace watched him from the kitchen doorway, marveling at how different he looked without that careful control. Younger, more human, less like the dangerous man who'd pulled her from one life and dropped her into another. She should have hated him, should have resented every choice he'd made that led to this moment. But watching him sleep, this man who'd saved her daughter and trapped her in equal measure, Grace felt something more complicated than hate stirring in her chest. Something that terrified her more than any threat from Philadelphia ever could. The man from Philadelphia had a name, Vincent Torres. Grace learned it 3 days after Caleb fell asleep on her couch, after he'd woken at dawn and left without a word, after Harper had appeared with coffee and croissants and carefully didn't mention their employer's departure. Harper told her because she believed Grace deserved to know what was coming. That was the thing about Harper. Beneath her professional exterior, she had a streak of mercy that sometimes overruled her orders. Torres runs operations from South Jersey to Baltimore, Harper explained while Lily was at school. Drugs, mostly. Some gun running. He and Caleb had an arrangement that fell apart 2 years ago. What kind of arrangement? Harper's expression went carefully neutral. The kind where both sides agreed not to kill each other. But Torres has a long memory and a short temper. He's been looking for leverage. And I'm leverage. You're what happens when someone powerful gets careless. Harper poured more coffee, her movements practiced and calm despite the weight of what she was saying. Torres knows about you now. Knows about Lily. He won't move immediately. He's cautious. Likes to plan. But he will move eventually. Grace felt cold despite the spring warmth coming through the windows. What does that mean for us? It means we tighten security. It means Lily gets escorted to and from school by people trained to handle situations. It means you don't go anywhere without me or someone like me. Harper met her eyes. It means this just got more real. The new reality arrived in layers. First came the additional security cameras, installed while Lily was at school so she wouldn't ask questions. Then came the panic buttons in every room, disguised as decorative light switches. Then came the bulletproof windows. Harper called them reinforced glass, like that made it better, installed over a weekend when Grace took Lily to a museum in Manhattan under the watchful eyes of 2 new security personnel. Caleb disappeared for a week. No visits, no calls. Grace told herself she didn't care, that his absence meant nothing. But she caught herself listening for his footsteps, looking toward the door when she heard cars pass on the street. When he finally returned, it was just after midnight on a Tuesday. Grace was awake. She was always awake lately, sitting in the darkened living room and watching the street through the new bulletproof glass. The door opened without knocking. Caleb moved through the brownstone like he could navigate it blind, finding her in the darkness without hesitation. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." He sat on the couch beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. He smelled like rain and something metallic that might have been blood, but Grace didn't want to confirm. "Harper told you," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Are you afraid?" Grace considered lying. Considered saying no. She was fine. She could handle this. But sitting in the dark with this man who'd become both her captor and her strange protector, she found she didn't want to lie. "I'm terrified. Not for me. For Lily. She's 7 years old, and her biggest worry should be whether she gets the right flavor of juice box at lunch. Not whether some criminal from Philadelphia decides she's useful." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It won't come to that." "How can you promise that?" "Because I'll burn Philadelphia to the ground before I let anyone touch her." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "Or you." Grace turned to look at him, really look at him. The streetlight caught the angles of his face, through shadows that made him look dangerous and beautiful and impossibly young for someone who spoke about burning cities like it was a simple logistical problem. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care this much?" Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. Caleb was quiet for so long Grace thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you reminded me what it was like to be human, to care about someone beyond their usefulness, to want to protect something just because it exists and is good." "I'm not good." "You're better than anyone in my world." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers like it was the most natural thing. "You're real, Grace. Everything in my life is calculated, strategic, designed to serve a purpose. But you're just trying to keep your daughter alive and happy. That's honest. That's clean. And I don't have anything clean in my life except you." Grace's throat tightened. "I'm not your redemption." "I know, but maybe you're my reminder that redemption exists." They sat in the darkness, hands linked, while the city hummed beyond the windows. Grace knew this was dangerous, letting herself soften toward him, letting him become something more than the man who'd trapped her. But she was tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, and his hand in hers felt like an anchor in a storm that kept getting worse. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not about Torres or security or business. Just something real." Caleb's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I haven't slept through a full night since I was 16. I dream about things I've done, people I've hurt, choices I can't take back." "What happened when you were 16? "My father. He ran a construction company, legitimate, but he owed money to the wrong people and couldn't pay. They made an example of him." His voice went flat. "I found him in our garage. I was supposed to be at a friend's house, but I came home early." Grace squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry. I killed the men who did it. All 3 of them. I was 17 by then. And after that, the people my father owed decided I was useful. Turned out I was good at the kind of work that requires you to turn off your conscience. And now I own this city. Are pieces of it. Enough that people like Torres have to think twice before coming for me. He turned to face her. But it's all built on blood, Grace. Everything I have. Everything I am. I'm not a good man. I need you to understand that. I do understand, Grace said. But I also understand that you're paying for my daughter's medical care. That you've made sure she's safe and healthy and happy. That you haven't hurt me, even though you could. So maybe you're not as bad as you think. Or maybe I'm worse and just better at hiding it. Grace pulled her hand from his and cupped his face, making him look at her. Stop. I know what you are. But I also know what you've done for us. Both things can be true. Caleb's eyes searched his in the darkness. You should hate me. Probably. But I don't. The admission hung between them, dangerous and true. Grace saw something shift in Caleb's expression, a wall coming down, a guard being lowered. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His kiss was gentle, hesitant, nothing like the commanding presence he usually carried. It tasted like questions and confessions and all the things neither of them had been brave enough to say out loud. When he pulled back, Grace's heart was hammering. This is a terrible idea. The worst, Caleb agreed. Torres, the danger, everything you said about leverage. Still true, all of it. He stood, putting distance between them like it physically hurt. Which is why I shouldn't have done that. Why I should leave. Are you going to? He looked at her, his expression caught between want and duty. If I was smart, I would. And if you're not, then I'll stay, and probably get us both killed. Grace stood, crossing the space between them. I've been dying slowly for years. Maybe quick would be an improvement. Don't say that. Then don't treat me like I'm fragile. She pressed her palm against his chest, felt his heart racing beneath her hand. I'm still here, still fighting, still choosing this life over whatever alternative existed. If that makes me foolish, fine. But don't insult me by pretending I don't know what I'm doing. Caleb covered her hand with his. You terrify me. Good. You terrify me too. He kissed her again, harder this time, and Grace kissed him back like they were both drowning and this was the only air available. It was reckless, dangerous, exactly the kind of thing that would make Torres's job easier if he ever got close enough to exploit it. But Grace was done being careful, done measuring every move against the risk. She'd been living in fear for so long that this new fear, the kind that came with wanting someone, with letting someone in, felt almost like freedom. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. This changes nothing about the danger. I know. And everything about my ability to think clearly. Mine too. We're both idiots. Grace laughed despite everything. Probably. But at least we're idiots together. He stayed that night. Not in the guest room, but with Grace, holding her like she was something precious while they both failed to sleep and watched the dawn come up over Brooklyn. And somewhere in Philadelphia, Vincent Torres made plans that would test every fragile thing they'd just begun to build. Torres made his move on a Thursday in May when the city smelled like rain and possibility. Grace was walking Lily home from school, Harper trailing them by half a block. 2 additional security personnel she'd learned not to notice flanking them from across the street. It should have been safe. Everything about the walk was calculated, planned, secured. But Torres had been planning longer. The van came from nowhere, screeching around the corner with timing too perfect to be chance. Grace barely had time to register the sound before Harper was pushing her and Lily toward a storefront, her body a shield between them and whatever was coming. Gunshots cracked through the spring air. Grace heard them like they were coming from underwater, muffled and distant despite their proximity. She covered Lily with her body, pressed them both against brick that scraped her palms, and prayed to a god she'd stopped believing in years ago. More shots, screaming from somewhere down the block. The squeal of tires. Then Harper's voice, tight with pain but still commanding. Move. Now. Through the store. Grace didn't question. She grabbed Lily. Her daughter was crying, terrified, but moving, and ran. Through a boutique she'd walked past 100 times, past racks of expensive clothes and a shopkeeper who was already on the phone with 911. Out the back door into an alley where another black SUV was waiting, engine running. They were inside before Grace could think. Harper bleeding from her shoulder but still moving, still focused, barking orders into her phone. The SUV peeled out, taking turns so fast Grace had to hold Lily tight to keep them both upright. What's happening? Lily sobbed. Grace didn't have an answer that wouldn't terrify her more. So she just held on and let Harper's phone conversation fill the silence with words like compromised and extraction, and send Caleb to the secondary location. They drove for 20 minutes, weaving through Brooklyn streets with the kind of precision that spoke to practice and planning. Finally, they pulled into an underground garage in a building Grace didn't recognize. Harper ushered them out, still bleeding but moving like it didn't matter. The safe house was on the 15th floor, sterile and anonymous, with no pictures on the walls and furniture that looked like it had been bought in bulk. Harper disappeared into a bathroom to deal with her shoulder while Grace held Lily and tried to stop shaking. Caleb arrived 30 minutes later, moving through the door like a storm given human form. His eyes found Grace immediately, scanning her for injuries with an intensity that would have been frightening if she'd had room left for fear. Are you hurt? His hands were on her shoulders, her face, checking for wounds he couldn't see. We're fine. Harper. I know. She'll be okay. The bullet went through. He crouched in front of Lily, his voice gentling. Hey, sweetheart. That was scary, wasn't it? Lily nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Those were guns. Yeah, they were. And I'm sorry you had to hear that. But you're safe now. And Harper is going to be fine. She's tough. Will they come back? Caleb's jaw tightened. No, they won't get another chance. There was something in his voice that made Grace's blood run cold. A finality that spoke to decisions already made and consequences already set in motion. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. Harper emerged from the bathroom with her shoulder bandaged, pale but functional. She conferred with Caleb in low voices while Grace got Lily settled on the couch with a blanket and a tablet loaded with movies. We're moving you tonight, Caleb said, returning to Grace's side. Out of New York. Somewhere Torres can't reach. Where? Does it matter? Yes. Grace stood, keeping her voice low so Lily wouldn't hear. It matters. You can't just keep moving us around like chess pieces. Better a chess piece than a casualty. This is my life, Caleb. My daughter's life. We deserve to know what's happening. His expression softened. You're right. I'm sorry. There's a place in Montana. Remote. Secure. Torres won't think to look there. Montana. As far from Brooklyn as you could get without leaving the country. Grace thought about the brownstone, about the life they'd started to build there, about Lily's school and her friends and the routine they'd finally established. For how long? Until I handle Torres. Handle how? Caleb's silence was answer enough. Grace felt her stomach twist. You're going to kill him. I'm going to end this, whatever way necessary. And if you die doing it, then Harper will make sure you and Lily stay safe. She has instructions, resources. You'll be taken care of. Grace wanted to scream, wanted to rage at him for being willing to die for them, for making choices that would leave them alone if they went wrong. But Lily was 10 feet away trying not to cry while watching a movie she'd probably seen 50 times, and this wasn't the time for anger. Come with us, Grace said instead. To Montana. Let someone else deal with Torres. There is no one else. This is my world, Grace. My fight. I brought you into it and I'll get you out of it, but I can't run. If I run, I lose everything. And men like Torres don't forget. He'll keep coming until one of us is dead. Grace knew he was right. Hated it, but knew it. This was always how it was going to end, with blood and violence and choices that couldn't be unmade. She reached for his hand. Then come back. When it's done, come back to us. Caleb pulled her close, wrapping her in arms that felt like the only safe place left in the world. I'll try. Promise me. I can't. Promise me anyway. He pressed his lips to her forehead. I promise. I'll come back. They left for Montana that night on a private plane from a small airport in New Jersey. Harper stayed behind, her arm in a sling but her eyes sharp. She hugged Grace before they boarded, whispered take care of him if he makes it back, like she knew something Grace didn't. The house in Montana was beautiful in a way that felt alien after Brooklyn. Mountains instead of skyscrapers. Silence instead of sirens. Space that went on forever in every direction. Lily loved it immediately. Within days, she was exploring the property, making friends with the security personnel who were less obvious here but still present. She asked about Caleb once, and Grace told her he was working. It wasn't really a lie. Grace spent the nights unable to sleep, checking her phone for messages that didn't come. Caleb had said he'd go dark until it was over. No contact meant no trail for Torres to follow, but the silence was its own kind of torture. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Grace started to believe he wasn't coming back. Started to imagine what that meant, raising Lily here in Montana, building a life from ashes again, learning to live with the weight of loving someone who'd died keeping her safe. Then, on a Tuesday night in June when the sun was just starting to set over the mountains, she heard tires on the gravel drive. Grace was outside before she decided to move, her heart in her throat. The black SUV that pulled up wasn't one she recognized, but when the rear door opened and Caleb climbed out, she stopped caring about anything except the fact that he was alive. He looked like hell. Thinner, exhausted, with new scars on his face and hands that spoke to violence Grace didn't want to imagine. But he was breathing, moving, real. She hit him hard enough to hurt, wrapping her arms around him like she could anchor him to this world through sheer force of will. He made a sound that might have been pain or relief or both, holding her back just as tightly. I promised, he said into her hair. I said I'd come back. Grace pulled back just far enough to see his face. Is it over? It's over. Torres is dead. His operations are scattered. And I made sure everyone knows what happens when they threaten what's mine. What's yours? Caleb cupped her face in hands that were scarred and shaking. You, Lily, this thing we've built between us. It's mine, and I'll burn down anyone who tries to take it. It should have sounded possessive, frightening, but standing in the Montana twilight with this man who'd nearly died keeping them safe, Grace felt only relief. Then stay, she said. Stay with us. No more running. No more fights. Just stay. Caleb kissed her, soft and sure, like he was finally home after a long journey. Okay, I'll stay. Montana in summer felt like a different world. Not just geographically far from Brooklyn, but temporally displaced. Like Grace had stepped through a door in May and emerged somewhere time moved slower, where the weight of the past few months could finally start to lift. Caleb stayed, not just for days or weeks, but through June and into July. He shed his suits for jeans and t-shirts, traded his city pala for a tan earned from helping Lily build a treehouse in the towering pine behind the property. The transformation was startling. Under the Montana sky, he looked younger, less haunted, almost peaceful. You're different here, Grace said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Lily was inside with one of the security team, playing cards and eating popcorn. Different how? Lighter, like you left something heavy back in New York. Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hand finding hers on the bench between them. I left my old life there. On most of it, Harper's running things. She's better at it than I ever was. More diplomatic. Less likely to solve problems with violence. Can you really just walk away? I don't know. He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the amber light of sunset. But I know I want to. For the first time in 15 years, I want something besides power and survival. What do you want? This. You. Lily asking me for help with her homework. Mornings where I don't wake up wondering who wants me dead. The chance to be someone besides who I became after my father died. Grace leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder against hers. You know we can't hide forever. I know, but maybe we don't have to. Torres is gone. His network is fractured. And I've spent the last month making it very clear that I'm out of the game. That anyone who comes for me or mine will face consequences they can't imagine. And you think that'll be enough? No, but I think it buys us time to figure out what comes next. What came next, surprisingly, was something resembling normal. Lily started at the local school in the fall, a small building where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest drama was whose horse won at the county fair. Grace found work at a bookstore in the nearby town, not because she needed the money. Caleb had made sure they'd never need money again, but because she needed something that was hers. Caleb struggled more. He wasn't used to quiet, wasn't used to days without crisis or strategy or the constant calculation of risk. He'd wake in the middle of the night. Grace could feel him leave the bed, hear him pacing downstairs until exhaustion finally pulled him back to sleep. You could talk to someone, Grace suggested one morning over coffee. A therapist. Someone who specializes in former criminals learning to live normal lives. Caleb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I don't think that's a common specialty. You're not a criminal. You're just someone who did what they had to do to survive. That's generous. But we both know I did more than survive. I thrived on it. The power, the control, the way people feared me. He set down his coffee cup. Some days I miss it. How terrible is that? Grace reached across the table for his hand. It's human. You built your whole identity around that life. Of course part of you misses it, but that doesn't mean you can't build something new. What if I'm not capable of new? What if this, he gestured around the kitchen, at the life they'd created, is just a temporary delusion and eventually I'll ruin it? Then we'll deal with it when it happens. Together. The word settled between them with the weight of a promise. Together. Not her alone managing crisis. Not him isolated in his darkness. Together. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, and it sounded almost real. Winter came early to Montana, blanketing the property in snow that Lily found magical and Grace found daunting. Caleb taught them both to chop wood, to winterize the pipes, to respect the cold in a way city dwellers never had to. Christmas arrived with an intimacy Grace hadn't expected. Just the three of them in a house that finally felt like home, exchanging gifts that mattered because they were chosen with care. Lily gave Caleb a drawing of the three of them standing in front of the house, her 7-year-old hand rendering them as a family. He stayed at it for so long Grace thought he might cry. Can I keep this? He asked Lily. It's your present. Of course you can keep it. That night, after Lily was asleep, Grace found Caleb staring at the drawing where he'd hung it in their bedroom. You okay? I've done terrible things, Grace. Hurt people. Ruined lives. And somehow I ended up here, with you and Lily, pretending I deserved this happiness. His voice cracked. How is that fair? Grace wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek to his back. Life isn't fair. But maybe that cuts both ways. Maybe you've suffered enough. Maybe you've paid enough. Maybe it's okay to stop punishing yourself and just accept that this is real. What if I wake up and it's all gone? Then we'll have had this moment. This year. However long we get. Isn't that worth something? Caleb turned in her arms, looking down at her with an expression caught between hope and fear. It's worth everything. They made love that night with a tenderness that surprised them both. No agency, no desperation, just the quiet affirmation that they'd found something worth keeping in each other. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Grace's head on his chest, Caleb spoke into the silence. "Marry me." Grace went still. "What?" "Marry me. Not because you have to, or because I'm keeping you safe, or because we're trapped together. Marry me because I love you and I want Lily to have stability, and I want to wake up every morning knowing that this is real and permanent and mine." Grace pushed up on her elbow to look at him. "You love me?" Desperately, terrifyingly, in ways I didn't know I was capable of. "I love you too." The words felt new in her mouth, strange and right all at once. "And yes, 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 I'll marry you. You difficult, dangerous, surprisingly tender man." Caleb pulled her close, and Grace felt him shaking, not with fear or cold, but with something that might have been joy. They told Lily at breakfast. She looked between them with her wise 7-year-old eyes and said, "Does this mean Caleb is my dad now?" Grace glanced at Caleb, unsure how to answer. He crouched beside Lily's chair, meeting her at eye level. "Only if you want me to be. I know I can't replace your real father." "I don't remember him," Lily interrupted. "He left when I was a baby. But you're here. You helped me with my homework, and you built me a treehouse, and you make Mom smile again." She considered. "So yay, you can be my dad." Caleb looked like he'd been hit. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I'd be honored." They married in February at the courthouse in town, with Harper flying in to serve as witness and Lily standing between them in a dress they'd picked out together. It was simple and quick and exactly what they needed, not a performance or spectacle, just a promise made official. That night, lying in bed as man and wife, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Hope. The belief that maybe the worst was behind them. That maybe they'd actually made it through. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "That we got lucky. Against all odds, we somehow ended up here." "Lucky?" He tested the word. "I've never thought of myself as lucky before." "Stop." He kissed her temple. "Okay. I'm lucky. We're lucky. This is real and good and ours." And for that moment, in the Montana winter with snow falling soft outside the window, it was enough to believe him. 2 years passed like an exhale after holding your breath too long. Not without moments of tension. Old associates from New York would occasionally reach out, testing Caleb's resolve, seeing if he was really out or just lying low. But Harper handled most of it, and what she couldn't, Caleb dealt with through phone calls that he'd take outside, returning to the house with shadows in his eyes that would fade once Lily launched herself at him demanding attention. Grace watched him transform in increments. The nightmares came less frequently. The middle of the night pacing stopped. He started teaching Lily to fish in the stream that ran through their property, his patience with her endless questions revealing a gentleness Grace had only seen glimpses of before. The bookstore where Grace worked became hers when the owner retired. Grace Mitchellstone, business owner, helping people find stories that would matter to them. It felt impossibly far from the woman who dialed a wrong number in a Queens apartment, drowning under debt and desperation. Lily thrived. She grew taller, her asthma controlled by medication and clean mountain air. She made friends, brought home solid grades, learned to ride horses at the neighbor's ranch. Sometimes Grace would watch her daughter play and feel overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all, the absolute mundane miracle of a child who was healthy and happy and safe. They never went back to New York. Harper came to visit occasionally, bringing news from the city that felt increasingly distant. The empire Caleb had built continued under her management, laundered and legitimized piece by piece until it was almost respectable. Almost. "You ever regret it?" Harper asked one visit, watching Caleb and Lily practice archery in the backyard. Walking away from all that power. Grace considered the question. He regrets what he had to do to get it, but giving it up? I think that might be the only thing he's ever done that he doesn't regret. He seems happy. Different. He's learning how to be a person instead of a weapon. It's slow, but he's trying. Harper smiled. You're good for him. Better than anything that city ever gave him. After Harper left, Grace found Caleb on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains in that way he did when he was thinking too much. She sat beside him, fitting herself against his side like she'd done 1,000 times before. Harper thinks we're good together, she said. Harper's right. She also thinks you're different now. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I feel different. Like I shed a skin somewhere between Brooklyn and here. Like whoever I was before is someone I can barely remember. Do you miss him? That version of you? Sometimes. Mostly I'm grateful he got us here. He looked at her, his expression open in a way that still surprised her. I spent 15 years becoming someone dangerous. And then you dialed a wrong number and I got to spend the last 3 learning how to be human again. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. You were always human. You just forgot for a while. Maybe. Or maybe you're just generous enough to see humanity in people who don't deserve it. Stop that. You deserve this. We both do. After everything we survived, we deserve peace. They sat in the quiet as the light faded, comfortable in their silence. Inside, Grace could hear Lily singing along to some pop song, her voice carrying through the open windows. It was such a normal sound. Such a beautifully ordinary moment. I have something to tell you, Grace said, and Caleb tensed slightly. 2 years of peace hadn't erased his instinct to expect crisis. Nothing bad. Actually, something good. Maybe. You're pregnant. Grace jerked back to look at him. How did you? You've been tired, emotional, and you stopped drinking coffee 2 weeks ago without mentioning it. He smiled, and it transformed his face. How far along? 8 weeks. I was going to wait until I was sure, but… Caleb kissed her, cutting off the explanation. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. We're having a baby. Are you happy? I know we didn't plan. I'm terrified. And yes, happy. Incredibly happy. He rested his hand on her still flat stomach. Another chance to get it right. To be there from the beginning. You've been there for Lily. I know. But this, his voice caught, this is ours. Start to finish. And maybe that's selfish. But I want it. Want to be the dad who sees first steps and first words and doesn't miss anything because I was too busy building empires that didn't matter. Grace covered his hand with hers. You're going to be amazing. I'm going to try. They told Lily over dinner. She was 9 now, old enough to understand what it meant but young enough to be purely excited. A baby. Can I help name it? Can I teach it stuff? Will it sleep in my room? Caleb fielded her questions with the patience he'd developed over 2 years of parenting, promising her involvement and importance and all the things a big sister needed to hear. Watching them together, this man who'd been forged in violence learning gentleness through a child who'd never feared him, Grace felt her chest tighten with emotion. This was what she'd dreamed of in that Queen's apartment when exhaustion and terror had been her constant companions. Not the house or the safety or even the absence of debt. This, family, love, the ordinary magic of people choosing each other day after day. The baby came in January, a boy they named after Caleb's father. Thomas Stone entered the world healthy and loud, and Caleb cried when he held him for the first time in a way Grace suspected he'd never let himself cry before. He's perfect, Caleb whispered, looking down at his son with wonder. How did we make something this perfect? Carefully, Grace said, exhausted and happy. Very carefully. Lily was an attentive big sister, hovering over Thomas with protective intensity. She'd read to him, sing to him, tell him stories about their family that were already developing their own mythology. This is how Mom and Dad met, she'd say, not knowing the real story. They fell in love and saved each other, and then we became a family. It was close enough to true. The details didn't matter. The fear, the coercion, the dangerous beginning. What mattered was what they'd built from those ashes. Grace reopened the bookstore when Thomas was 3 months old, bringing him with her in a carrier while she shelved books and helped customers. Small-town Montana accepted her without question. This woman who'd appeared 3 years ago with a daughter and a dangerous-looking man and turned out to be just another person building a life. Sometimes, late at night when Thomas was sleeping and Lily was in bed and Caleb was beside her, Grace would think about that phone call. About how one wrong digit had changed everything. About how close she'd come to never making that call at all. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb would ask when he caught her staring into the darkness. "How lucky we are," she'd say. "How easily this could have gone differently." But it didn't. "We're here. We made it." And that was the truth they lived by. They'd made it. Through the fear and the violence and the impossible choices. Through Torres and the months in hiding and the slow, difficult work of building trust. They'd survived and more than survived. They'd found something worth keeping. The mountains outside their window stood eternal and uncaring, indifferent to human drama. The snow fell and melted in its seasons. The stream ran regardless of who listened to its sound. And in a house that had become a home, a family that had been forged in crisis found its peace. Not perfect peace. Caleb still had days where the shadows caught up with him. Grace still had moments of panic when Lily was late coming home from school. They both woke sometimes expecting to find it all gone, revealed as a dream they'd shared. But those moments grew fewer. The good days outnumbered the bad. And slowly, carefully, they learned to believe in their own happiness. Years later, when Thomas was 5 and Lily was 14 and Grace found the first threads of silver in her hair, someone would ask her how she and Caleb met. And she'd smile and give the sanitized version. "We met in New York during a difficult time, and we helped each other through it." The truth was longer, more complicated, full of wrong turns and dangerous men and choices made in desperation. But the truth was also this: she'd called a wrong number, and it had brought her home. Asterisk if stories like this linger in your heart long after they end. Don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. Asterisk.